But you were emphasizing to me that there are particular reasons why Russia's so beset on it now. It's become like a sort of a symbolism, a micro symbol for the overall campaign of Putin, right? Like Bakhmut 18 months ago, or nearly 2 years ago now. It's one of these towns. It makes up a relationship to the fortress line, the fortress cities, but you still think it's not that big a deal for Ukraine, but it is for Russia's, I don't know, morale.
Well, for Russia, it has to be. I mean, they have to show some victories. I mean, you don't waste this many lives and this much money, and you can't claim that you've taken Kiev, but that you've almost encircled Покrovsk. Who's going to say that's a victory? It's a disaster.
So what was he saying then?
Pretty much that is that, a city has value for various reasons, but if it's a logistics hub, like this city was a logistics hub for Ukraine when Bakhmut was still Bakhmut, but today it's not. I mean, it's been largely destroyed. And I guess that's part of the difference in strategy between Ukraine and Russia. Russia has to physically take territory to have a successful invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine can afford to cede territory. It's not a big deal. I mean, their objective is quite a bit different. It's more strategic, which is to bankrupt Russia's ability to wage war.
This is the Global Gambit.
I don't think it's any surprise that the central bank has been making it very clear about what they're going to have to do to interest rates just to keep the economy going. The ruble is looking as worse as ever, to be honest with you. But take me through one aspect of this before we get into the economy a little bit more, Jason, is the ability for the EU to siphon off these $300 billion of reserves, or the 150 billion that they were planning to do, right? Is that something that would have a sizable impact? The Russians obviously like to say that it won't.
No, I don't. In the short term, I don't think it does. In the long term, right? But in the short term, I don't think it does. I think the reality is that it's a little bit different. The way I would look at it is so. Let's look at any given situation. Let's look at warfare. And I've never actually thought of this analogy before, but I think it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Is that any given, something like a war is eventually, it's about resources, right? Which one can outstand the other one, whether it's the number of soldiers or maintain the territory with the resources they have, being the soldiers, the money, the weapons, et cetera, et cetera. So today, one thing that Russia has that Ukraine doesn't have is really, really, really huge cost economically, as well as for military technology. Ukraine, because it is a recipient of so much assistance, it's not directly bearing the cost of a lot of this in the economic sense, right? For paying for the weapons, for instance, paying for the intelligence, for instance. It has that advantage. Russia, though, doesn't. So Russia is not dealing with a sort of artificial economy like Ukraine is. It actually has to go out and pay for this stuff. But to actually go out and pay for this stuff, it has to in rubles. But the problem is they don't have sufficient rubles. And that's why they're doing things like taking out money from the banks. But there's something else that's going on. The Russian government being more hurt than this money that's frozen being taken, it shows that, listen, your situation won't get better, because it's not like Ukraine is just getting 30 billion. For you to catch up with that 30 billion, you're also going to have to spend 30 billion, but you don't have it, which means you're going to have to go and print that money. And by printing that money, that is actually going to worsen the situation with the ruble. But there's another aspect that's probably more important than that money being frozen or what happens to it next. And I think it's a very good thing, obviously, but it's more important, I think, for Russia's future, is the fact that today, when they look at the situation economically and how they're going to be able to resolve it, we see that the Chinese as well as the Indians buying less Russian oil would probably be the most damning thing that can happen. And it's not just because they make up 80 to 85% of oil sales for Russia. And, combined, that's oil sales for Russia is about 40-45% of their national budget. It's not just because of that. It's because it's also a hard currency. Now, there was a huge problem with the rupees and everything else. I remember back in 2022, I'm sure we remember those stories. But if we look at something like the Chinese currency, the yuan, the Russians do like that as a reserve currency. It's something that they would like to have. But they're also interested in, putting the money, parking the money in other places and doing stuff with it. But today, if they don't have hard currency and they really are just going to be sitting there in a ton of rubles and printing more and more because they're not getting oil revenues, that is something that's really going to be extremely, extremely painful for the Russian economy.
It is. As you know, I mainly focus on the international relations, the foreign policy, the geoeconomics here, but so I defer to you for the intricate details of the relationships, the personal dynamics in the Kremlin. Yeah, I mean, the fact that the Kremlin has now begun to issue renminbi-backed bonds and whatever, let alone the secondary sanctions by the Trump administration and the impact that's having on China's relationship or inflow of Russian energy is huge, right? I don't think there's enough appreciation for the significance of that. But we both have said, I think the last time when we chatted in the summer, right, about the relationship of Russia to North Korea or Russia to Iran. It's very different to the relationship to China because China still benefits from the system as it is, right, versus Russia and Iran and North Korea, which are more rogue or pariah or whatever term you want to use, right? So I'm interested to know a little bit more about what you think could be the ramifications, the longer term ramifications going into next year for these changes by the Chinese and Indians to an extent.
Well, I mean, it's going to really depend on I think most likely, it appears at least at this point, that there is going to be some serious friction for Russia in the near term. I've still got a phone call later today with a guy who's a oil industry analyst who specifically discussed this issue, by the way. I wish this call was a couple hours later, but either way, one thing that he observed when we spoke, or we were texting, I should say, and agreed to just speak would be easier, was he was saying, if you look at what's going on and where oil prices are today and the deep discounts that Russia's already given, sometimes up to 30%, because, getting people to do something like buy sanctioned goods is a whole thing. This is actually sort of becoming a point where Russia might lose the ability to even find clients. That is, people want to buy it, not because of the US sanctions alone, but because it's like, listen, it costs us too much. We're not making profit on this anymore. This is no longer a working substitution. And as a result, if it reaches that point for Russia, no, then I think it really does become a disaster very quickly. I sincerely mean that, because it's not like, once again, this is not something that is hypothetical. We know how much their budget comes from this. We know how big these corporations are. We know how much they're producing. But it's not just that. It's the fact that knowing all this and also having the secondary things like the number of businesses that are going out in Russia, the fact that, look in Russia, polling in Russia says about 48% of people, so half, are looking for a second job due to the fact that they can't make ends meet, which is really incredible because salaries in Russia have continued to rise a lot. So what does that really mean? Well, it means high inflation. That's what it really means. So you have a 2.2% unemployment rate, 2.2%. And yet, half the people are looking for a second job. Of the half of people looking for a second job, I think it's 93% said they've struggled to be able to find one. When you have an employment rate that's at 2%, that's not an indication that your economy is doing well. It's a sign of extremely high inflation. So that eventually will have to be caught up with. I mean, anyone, and I'm not an economist, but obviously, I think that everybody understands when you've printed a ton of money, it doesn't just disappear. You're going to have to do something with it. That eventually will have a hangover. And that's going to come. And I don't think that they can put that off forever. I think right now they're buying time. They're trying to do different things. But in the long term, will they really be able to recover for that? No. I see no logical way that they're going to be able to shore that up or how they're going to make their currency be firmer. I don't see an explanation. And especially if they were to lose the international markets, you tell me what they do. I see no way that this works out well.
But then, and to be contrarian for this, often we're seeing the suggestions that the economy is about to collapse, Russia's about to disintegrate, but we're 3 years in and the sanctions are still not having the intended effect, or they're finally having intended effect. So to be devil's advocate, Jason, why hasn't Russia's economy collapsed yet if it is still so bad?
I don't know why. Everyone always asks that, but the reality is, if you go to a doctor and they tell you have stage 4 cancer and you're going to die, they're not giving you the date. They're telling you you're terminal. And the patient in this case is terminal. It will die. It's not, I don't know what date it's going to happen, but I can guarantee you it will. It's not sustainable as it is. If you go and they do a blood test and they tell you you're terminal and you have stage 4, it's probably true. I don't think they're just kidding. And when you look at the economic indicators from Russia, it's the same. It's not going to survive. And I have yet to talk to any economist who's had a different opinion looking at the numbers, who actually studies Russia, who specifically works on Russia and isn't just giving their off-the-cuff viewpoint. I've not met one yet who says, no, it's probably going to work out okay. Still haven't met one.
I think it's a good analogy. I haven't heard someone put it quite as stark as that, but I guess it's, as I've spoken to various other economists or people who cover Russia like you, one person described it as a slow-moving car crash, sort of that it is gradually unraveling, but it's very difficult to put an end point on it, and that's what so many people want to see. But the other issue is obviously the sustainability for Ukraine. You talked about the different components that are needed in warfare, and obviously manpower is something that Russia likes to claim, at least, that it has. Demographically speaking, Ukraine has a lower fertility rate than Russia does, aside from the war. So how can we ensure that Ukraine is going to be sustainable in its defense if the Europeans don't get their act together, if Trump suddenly decides one day he's changed his mind again, right?
I don't think the fertility rate, we'd have to wait another 25 years for them to reach draft age in Ukraine, so I'm not worried about the fertility rate right now. But as far as the But as far as the demographics of the population, yeah, Ukraine has significant demographic problems. Different than Russia's, they have very different demographic problems, so they both have very significant problems. Russia's problems, though, are multifold. I mean, their problems are probably actually worse just because of the way that if you look at the society, it should be a pyramid is what you're aiming for. So you have a tax base that's able to support the people at the top, like on pensions. As an example, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but that's just like explaining it, right? Because there's the number of people who are using the services and are paying for them is bigger than those who are just receiving, including the roads or whatever else it is. But in this case, it's in Russia, the demographics have a lot of problems. There's a lot of setbacks. Ukraine's also had massive problems with the fact that so many people left the country after the war began. After 2014, then again in 2022, there was a massive migration out of the country, millions and millions and millions of people. Internally, there's domestic, internally displaced persons. And I don't remember the number. I want to say, oh yeah, thank you. No,
Yeah.
exactly. No, I want to say, I don't remember the number. I want to say domestically, it's like, what, 4.5 million, 6.7 million?
4 or 5 million, yeah.
Four, okay, it's around there. People have left the country, it's 6, 7 million. So yeah, it's got all these problems. But in the long term, I think this war showed us something very interesting, which is that if Ukraine, long term, let's imagine for the next 20 years, if Ukraine were to invest seriously in its military defense, we've seen that a much smaller Ukraine, I mean, in all of free Ukraine today, if we take out these people who have left the country, the people that live under occupation, there might only be about 25 million people in Ukraine. And if you consider of that 25 million, and we don't know, this is just an estimate, but it would seem to be reasonable to believe it's about 25 million. Russia's more or less 140 million. How's Ukraine been able to keep them at bay? I mean, this is 3.75 years into the 3-day special military operation. And the greatest excitement that the Kremlin has had in months is that we are close to encircling Pokrovsk. When you're saying we're close to encircling a village in eastern Ukraine that nobody knew existed before this war, I can't really say it's a great military success. I think that's pretty indicative of the fact that you're not doing well. And why are they doing that? It's because they have nothing else to brag about. I mean, they have to have something. I mean, how much do we talk about all these other towns? And it's not good to lose these cities. I'm not arguing that, of course, by any means. But my point is simply that this is not indicative of military victory. But why has Ukraine been able to keep the Russians at bay? The fundamental question. And I think there's several different reasons, but the primary reason is the fact that Ukraine has greater technological advantage. And in history, we've seen that repeat again and again. I mean, why is it that the colonizers showed up with rifles versus the indigenous populations that did not have them? Who won? Well, the ones with the rifles. We look in history, the guy who had the cannon versus those that didn't have the cannon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We saw that there's evolution, but the one that has a greater technology is typically the one that works out best. And we saw that in World War I and World War II as well. But let's go a step further. Today, if Ukraine invests in that, even though it has a much smaller population and it's being assisted by the West, which is appreciated, but let's just imagine they bought the weapons in the future, right? Or they're developing the weapons in the future. And if they have that and Russia doesn't, I think they'll still be able to defend themselves because we see that's what's occurring right now in this historic moment.
Yeah, of course, the technological element is what's different here and why Ukraine is disproportionately able to do so much despite, well, very little still. But I think what I mean by the fertility rate is just historically Russia had about 1.7 women per children per woman versus Ukraine's, which was 1.34, and that was before the war. So there's a lot of
Russia
planning nation, but Ukraine has it as bad, if not worse.
This is probably true. I mean, I don't remember this data off the top of my head. That being said, Russia has a different problem, which I think it's much more worried about if you went up with demographics, which is that the fertility rates now amongst ethnic Russians. Ethnic Russians are actually one of the lowest in the world. It's the minority populations in Russia, namely, like if you look at Moscow, the number of children per woman, there's 36,000 villages in Russia with a population of less than 10 people. There's over 20,000 villages that have gone completely extinct in the past decade.
It's a good point. It is a very good point about taking into consideration ethnic variation and that Russia has that ethnic diversity that Ukraine doesn't, and that it's the ethnic minorities that are bumping up, boosting Russia's overall total fertility rate, or TFR, to 1.67, when actually ethnic Russians, as you said, is around the same as Ukraine. So it's a good point, and definitely something that can get lost in the noise of just, headline data. So do you think that plays a longer term impact into Russia's mindset, or it doesn't?
I mean, I don't think that the leadership of Russia really cares about it. I mean, I think that they understand, those who work in state statistics probably understand this. But the senior leadership, I don't think they particularly care. That being said, for Russia as a whole, It is something that, according to the UN, the population of Russia by 2100 could drop as low as to about 105 million
Mhm.
people. It's currently 140. That's a pretty significant decline. But that's the fact that Russia as a country is sort of dying out in many, many different parts, many different ways. And it's not new. That's something that just started, in the past couple of years. That's been a problem for a long time. But that's something that they've also not been able to address successfully. But the government, could have managed things so differently. But obviously, having a war that had caused so many people to flee the country, especially those who they were the economic engines, those people that had the upper middle class jobs, those that are intelligent, who would want to have more kids in the population, that's probably not good for them. The fact that so many different people feel there's uncertainty. Whenever you see economic decline in a country, fertility drops. But there's also the fact that, you don't send off 1,100,000, almost 1,200,000 now, Russian soldiers to get killed or injured if you really care about the demographics of your country. So I don't see any of this being very good for Russia's long-term prospects.
No, it isn't. And you made a very good point about also, well, this is a Pyrrhic victory over Pokrovsk, right? What's the population? About 60,000 pre-war.
Pre-war.
And you've been
Pre-war.
using nearly 3 times as many soldiers to 1.5 times that of the Russians to take this unheard of town. What does that say about the state of the Russian military? And why does Putin want it so much? Why does he need it?
So the thing is, historically, Pokrovsk would have made sense as far as it went. It does have train lines there and everything else. But it also is where you get coke for doing the steel and everything else. But it's not currently being used for mining purposes. It's not currently being used for the trains. Having logistics is only useful if they can't be attacked. Now today, let's imagine Ukraine cedes Pokrovsk. Said for like a week now. I don't really think it's that big of a deal. It's not good to give up an area. Current population, it's undetermined, but it's definitely less than a couple thousand. I'd be surprised if it's that high realistically, though, looking at the photos, the videos. It looks like it's been pretty thoroughly destroyed. But there's nothing really there. It's rubble. And you can't really use the trains. You can't do the mining. And what do you really gain from it? Nothing. It's a big deal because Russia says it's a big deal. If nobody talked about it, it wouldn't be a big deal. Russia, in some different parts of this battle, are losing, I think the number is per square meter, 8 soldiers are killed or injured. Is that really a victory? What'd you gain? You've gotten a village that's totally destroyed. And look at Pokrovsk until the next large city. Going west, you'd have to go through a lot of fields and very difficult to defend areas. I don't see how this gets any better for Russia. I don't see where this gives them a clear operative advantage.
Okay, but you were emphasizing to me that there are particular reasons why Russia's so beset on it now. It's become like a sort of a symbolism, a micro symbol for the overall campaign of Putin, right? Like Bakhmut 18 months ago, or nearly 2 years ago now, it's one of these towns, it makes up a relationship to the fortress line, fortress cities, but you still think it's not that big a deal for Ukraine, but it is for Russia's, I don't know, morale.
Well, for Russia, it has to be. They have to show some victories. You don't waste this many lives and this much money, and you can't claim that you've taken Kiev, but that you've almost encircled Pokrovsk. Who's going to say that's a victory? It's a disaster. Sorry.
Are you okay?
No.
What are you drinking? It doesn't seem to be agreeing with
No,
you.
it's clear for my throat. Actually, let me go take a medicine. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, I only have a couple more questions for you, mate.
Sorry about that.
All right. So what was it that Chuck Farah, is it Farah? His
Yeah.
surname? So what was he saying there?
Pretty much that is that, a city has value for various reasons. But if it's a logistics hub, like this city was a logistics hub for Ukraine when Bakhmut was still Bakhmut. But today, it's not. It's been largely destroyed. And I guess that's part of the difference in strategy between Ukraine and Russia. Russia has to physically take territory to have a successful invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine can afford to cede territory. It's not a big deal. Their objective is quite a bit different. It's more strategic, which is to bankrupt Russia's ability to wage war. Hence why the attacks inside of Russia, like destroying the oil industry, they are things that could actually change the outcome of the war in the long term. Taking one more village like Bakhmut, or taking something like Slavyansk, or taking something like Pokrovsk, does it fundamentally change the war? No, not in any fundamental way. And that's why I think that, Russia here has got the wrong strategy. Russia's doing the same thing it's been doing for the last, 400 years or so, 300 years, where they just assume because they have a much larger population that their massive size would allow them to overrun their neighbors. But today, that doesn't really work out because if you're not having hand-to-hand combat, if you're not actually engaging with the enemy, you can't overrun them. You can't overwhelm them. The drones are destroying the Russians, as are the HIMARS, whatever, from a long distance. they aren't able to get to the point where they can physically overwhelm anybody. And that's the problem. Their whole strategy was based on that. But if that no longer matters, it's no longer critical, you don't have a winning strategy anymore. And that's why a country like Ukraine, which has 1/6 the population of Russia, 13% of the population of Russia, is able to keep Russia at bay. And Russia, after 2 years, losing another, 800,000 soldiers, was able to move from Bakhmut to where they currently are in Pokrovsk. That's a distance in car of, 15 minutes on a normal day? I can't say it's a very impressive military acclaim. I don't see anything going well for the Russian side. And I mean it seriously. It's like, tell me what was successful. I mean, Russia now has spent more time fighting the Ukrainians than they fought the Germans in World War II. And I think that World War II, there was something to show for it. What do they have to show today? I can't think of much.
Through that very direction between those two towns in 2003, 4, something like that. When we were on holiday and I was younger, and it didn't take that much time at all. Although I think the person who was driving us was also quite keen on speed, so certainly bringing back some memories. But Jason, I guess my last question really for you is sort of looking forward. Maybe we'll have you back before the end of the year, but this winter isn't going to be easy for either sides. But Russia, for sure, this is going to be a new reality. But all it seems to demonstrate is the Russian people, indoctrinated by Putin's propaganda, are just settling down with that whole mindset of, well, hardship, but that's just the way it is. This is always the way it's been. We're used to it. We'll just get on with it. Or is this time going to be different?
I don't think the Russian people are going to do anything. I think what's more likely to happen is the elites, because we're seeing them currently fight. Anything's possible there. I mean, if they think they're going to be purged, how people react when they're about to be purged is very predictable. I mean, and they're the ones that have the access to things like weapons and also armed men. That is actually where things get very interesting. The upper elites, and when we look at Russian history for that matter, there's a lot of instability. I mean, it's unusually high compared to other countries in Europe or the United States, for instance. The U.S., the past 250 years, we don't see revolutions, we don't see coups. In Russia, we've had at least 2 revolutions. We've had attempted coups. I mean, they got rid of Khrushchev. They also had 1992. We've had one after another. I mean, 5 different czars that got killed or replaced. Then you had, go through a list. It's very long. So why that's interesting, Russia does have a history of this. It has a history of having a very strong ruler who everybody assumes will be there for a long time, being the czar. But ultimately, that doesn't really guarantee him very much. He always appears strong. And it's always been that way in Russian history. And it's truly not unique to today and Putin. That is, I think, universally been the case. But what we've always found is that it wasn't always as strong as they thought it was. And it comes to a rapid, sudden conclusion when it's simply in the better interest of other people to act in their own interest. So today, if you're part of this oligarchical class and you're one of these Slovaki, and you realize that the other branch of it might liquidate you, I think it'd be strategically unwise to sit there and just let it happen. The wiser thing is to seize power for yourself. And that's historically in Russian history, the most likely thing to occur. And everybody would always be like, well, look at Stalin. Stalin is an outlier. Look at all of Russian history. It's pretty clear how this usually works out.
Very, very stark reminder there from you, Jason. But it's been a pleasure as always, my friend. Thank you for rejoining. I look forward to seeing how much your assessments come true and what happens next, and seeing what else you produce on your own channel. But everyone watching, Jason J. Smart, correspondent at Larger Kia Post and colleague and friend of the channel as well. And we look forward to seeing you in the future. But that's it from us.
Thank you. Great seeing you.
Bye-bye.